The woman you see here in this picture won the lottery. She may not look all that lucky. She is, after all, standing in the wreckage of her own life. This picture was taken this past May when a giant tornado destroyed the town of Moore, Oklahoma, where she lives. You'll remember that Moore tornado was one of the biggest ever recorded on Earth, more than a mile wide, with winds greater than 200 miles an hour. It leveled everything in its path, including this woman's house. But look, she's pointing to something, right? She's pointing to the purpose-built storm shelter where she rode out the terrifying storm that wrecked her house and her whole neighborhood. The AP photographer who took this picture reports that the woman and her husband had literally won a lottery for government rebates on shelters. They won, which meant the cost of it was paid for, and so they got a shelter. And when the storm hit them dead on, they lived because they had that shelter to climb into. Over the last decade or so, the town of Moore, Oklahoma has really been in a true tornado alley. After another deadly tornado there in 1999, the federal government helped thousands of people pay to install storm shelters. The federal government helped people afford these reinforced steel and concrete rooms that are designed and tested to help you survive what otherwise might not be survivable. And these shelters work. I mean, that's the important part, right? After the utter devastation this year in Moore, Oklahoma, scientists from Texas Tech, where they design safe rooms and they test them, they went to Moore and they walked through the neighborhoods looking for evidence of how their research had held up in the actual storm. And it turns out that the old-fashioned underground shelters, yeah, they worked. Also, the newfangled above-ground shelters, they also worked. Underground, above ground, if you got into a purpose-built shelter, you survived. That's the way most of the tiny town of Tushka, Oklahoma, rode out a storm in 2011 in their old underground shelter and also in their modern above-ground safe room at the local school. What matters is having somewhere safe to go to, having a shelter. And not everyone has that, sometimes with heartbreaking consequences. You might remember that in Moore, Oklahoma this year, the tornado struck a pair of elementary schools. One of them, it hit square on. In the harder hit school, the walls collapsed and 7 children died. They were smothered in the collapse of their building. Because when that tornado hit, they really had nowhere to go. Schools in Moore, Oklahoma do not have shelters or safe rooms. All around the town of Moore, people who had shelters at home were opening those hatches and those doors when the storm passed, finding themselves and their neighbors alive. While the kids at that school, who had no place to take shelter, those kids were lost. After the storm, Oklahoma's Republican Governor Mary Fallin, she got asked whether the state should do more to put shelters in schools. She said the public should have, quote, a very vigorous discussion as to what we can do within budgetary means. In Oklahoma, within budgetary means depends on what your town can afford or wants to spend, whether your town is relatively wealthy or relatively poor, or maybe whether your town is lucky enough to win a grant from the federal government, which might help. This spring, after those grade schoolers were killed in Moore, a local Democratic lawmaker in Oklahoma decided he was going to try to do something about that, vagaries. How can it be that you have to win a lottery to prepare for tornadoes? That people in rich towns will have ways for their kids to survive storms, but nobody else will? How can it be when we know what works? State Representative Joe Dorman asked the Republican legislature in Oklahoma to set aside $500 million to build safe rooms in the 2/3 of Oklahoma schools that do not have them. 2/3. And when Oklahoma's very Republican legislature blocked that idea, Mr. Dorman decided that he would ask Oklahoma voters directly to approve that funding. Volunteers fanned out across the state, collecting signatures in comic book stores and at a gun show and at football games and at hockey games, which I'm not sure I knew they had in Oklahoma, but they do. They kept working after Governor Fallin said she would not support the proposal to build the storm shelters for Oklahoma schools. They kept working even as they challenged the way the state had reworded their ballot measure. They worked until the deadline yesterday, and ultimately they fell short by about 25% in bright red, anti-tax, small government Oklahoma. Now, the story could have ended there. You try a couple of ways to get something done, you work really hard at it, you come up short, the state says no. What did you expect in Oklahoma, right? But that has not been the end, because today Joe Dorman announced that he is taking another run at the issue, and lots of other issues besides, by a very different means. Today he announced that he is taking the very first steps to run for governor next year as a progressive Democrat. in Oklahoma. Joe Dorman wants to run now for governor in Oklahoma against a Republican incumbent who won last time by 20 points. Call him crazy, but his first exploratory town hall is scheduled for a day after tomorrow. He's going for it. Joining us now for the interview is Oklahoma State Representative Joe Dorman. He's leader of the petition drive for those storm shelters in Oklahoma schools, and he's now a man who is officially thinking of running for governor. Representative Dorman, thanks very much for being with us tonight.
Thank you, Rachel.
So, Mary Fallin won the governorship in 2010 by a huge margin, and Oklahoma is really, really Republican, or at least votes really, really Republican. What makes you think that you might be able to unseat her next year?
Going out and visiting with the persons that signed this petition, the Oklahoma voters who saw a need for storm shelters in schools, many of those people expressed disappointment in the governor, and I will tell you, they admitted they were Republicans and they were ashamed that she was opposed to this issue. And I have hope that we will see some success with that we will keep this effort up, and people will vote for the individual. They won't just vote for the party, that we will see some common sense prevail here.
Why do you think that your referendum drive to try to get storm shelters into the schools, why do you think it came up short? That must have been a big disappointment.
The problem we faced was the opposition from our state capital. The polling numbers showed that this was very popular. Initially, the Republican Party chair in the state fought us. Then Governor Fallin joined in that discussion. And then Attorney General Scott Pruitt challenged our ballot title. Our state superintendent of public instruction, Janet Barisi, came out opposed to this. We saw Republican official after official fight this, and this was simply to put this issue on the ballot to let the voters decide.
You could argue that a central progressive idea, maybe the central progressive idea, is that the people should use the government, should be able to use our government to accomplish together what we can't do alone. Like, for example, building storm shelters, or for that matter, schools to put them in. Why is that central idea such a hard sell in Oklahoma? Why at least have the Republicans in Oklahoma been so successful selling against that idea?
And it's a difference between the officials inside the Capitol building and those citizens outside. They had to lie and mislead and confuse the voters in Oklahoma to throw in that doubt. We had so many people that were supportive of this until time and time again these officials kept throwing doubt to the voters. And I'm convinced we would have accomplished this goal if they would have kept their mouths shut, or they would have provided a suitable alternative. To this point, the only alternative Governor Fallin has proposed is to let the local districts raise their own property taxes the way they could do it right now. There's been no other solution presented.
Do you expect that if you are going to be running for governor and you're going to be the Democrat on the ballot November this upcoming year, that this issue about storm shelters in schools will be a central part of your campaign?
I can promise it will be a central part of the campaign, and it will be a continued discussion. We are going to work hard to make certain that the Oklahoma voters have the opportunity to vote on this issue sometime in 2014. The voters and the people that worked hard in this position, they deserve that opportunity to have a vote.
Joe Dorman, state representative from Oklahoma, leading the fight to try to get storm shelters in Oklahoma schools. It's still amazing to me that the majority of those schools in your state do not have them. Now a potential candidate for governor in your state. Good luck to you, sir. Stay in touch. Let us know how it goes.
I will. Thank you very much.
All right. Still to come, the biggest little traffic jam in the whole wide world today made it all the way to Washington. Please stay with us. That story's ahead.